You're listening to Al Pastor, the show that helps you love God, love your neighbor, and eat more tacos. I'm your host, Pastor Brian. Welcome to the show. Hey, friends, I want to welcome you to today's podcast. We are walking through the book of Acts, and specifically, we're in chapter 7. Today, we'll pick up at verse 17. In the previous episode, we began to look intently at Stephen's sermon. I have Noah in studio with me today. Noah, how are you doing?
Good.
Let me ask you a question. Have you been kind of overwhelmed with this chapter?
A little bit.
Okay, what's overwhelming about it?
For me, the commentary wasn't, the main one wasn't really doing a good job, and then it seems like it's just like a recap of old stuff.
Sure. So that's actually, I'm glad that you're kind of being open and honest about it. So what I want to say to you is this is the time that you actually have to nail down even more, because most of the time it's not like there's rainbows and sunshines and sprinkles, in our Christian walk, but you need to know that what you're doing is you're sowing into your heart, your soul, and into your life. So I believe you. This is a beautiful chapter, but it when I say overwhelming, it could be overwhelming because of the length and everything else. So what I want to instill or ingrain in you is that we keep going. We keep going, even if we don't have those, sparks. And so maybe we can add a little bit in there, but we go by faith. We don't go by feeling. So let's go ahead and we're going to start in verse 17. So Stephen has transitioned, just without getting too much into it. In the first 16 verses, what Stephen has done is highlighted the story of Abraham, and then he's highlighted the story of Joseph. Do you remember the two purposes why he did that first with Abraham?
With Joseph, was it because Joseph is like a type of Jesus, or?
Yeah. And his life is kind of overlaid. We would call this in the Bible types and shadows. So Joseph is a type of Jesus, and so you can see the similarities. They're pretty, they're overt it would be the word. Now, what about Abraham? Do you remember what the point? Why would he bring up Abraham?
Because it was
That was my email because I did not put it on do not disturb, but it doesn't matter. We'll keep rolling. I just put it on do not disturb. So Abraham, let's get back to him.
I forgot.
Okay. So Abraham, remember, he's the father of faith. Remember we talked about he had to walk, he had to obey God's voice. He didn't know, he didn't see it, he didn't obtain the promise. It wasn't about what he could see. It was about obeying God's word. So that was part of the point of that. Now we go into Moses, okay? And let's start in verse 17. He says, "But when the time of promise drew near, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt." Now I want you, Noah, to highlight, if you haven't highlighted, I want to suggest this to you. The phrase, the time of promise. That small phrase right there is highly, highly significant. The time of promise. So what Stephen is doing here is he's drawing a parallel from then to when?
Now.
To now, yeah, in the moment that he's preaching, right? He's saying there was a time of promise back then, and the time of promise has come now. And how would you describe the time of promise? Do you have any idea?
Not really.
Well, for them, what Stephen is referencing would be the birth of Moses. And the promise that God had is that he would hear his people and that he would deliver them. And so that whole story about Moses is really, really beautiful. But what it does is it points us to a bigger picture of the promise of Jesus. The Old Testament points to Jesus at every point. So these are, you've heard the expression double phrases before. Like you're saying one thing, but it can mean multiple things on multiple levels in conversation.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Stephen's doing. He says, but wink, wink, with the time of promise drew near, which God had sworn, and then now he ties it back. This is beautiful. To who? Abraham. And that promise was that God was going to bless him and multiply him, make him a great nation, and that through his seed all of the world would be blessed. He says that the people grew and multiplied in Egypt. And then verse 18. Until another king arose who did not know Joseph. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, no.
Well, the Pharaoh, when Pharaoh rose to power, Joseph was right there. It was all because of God's grace and favor and anointing upon Joseph's life. But when that Pharaoh died, there arose another Pharaoh. And when it says he didn't know Joseph, that means he didn't know. It wasn't as if he didn't know who Joseph was. It meant he didn't care. He was blind to the fact that Joseph was the reason that Egypt had prospered. That's the sense. Now, think about the audience that Stephen's talking to. They did not know God's Messiah. They were blind to who Jesus was. And so again, even though Stephen, this is what I want to make sure you get, because see, this is more than a history lesson. He's not just recounting what we could. Some people on the outside would be like, some old boring stories. He's not. He's doing his best in this moment to try to open blind eyes. That's what he's doing. And so he says, there was another king that arose that didn't know Joseph. And then he said, verse 19, this man dealt treacherously with our people and oppressed our forefathers, making them expose their babies so that they might not live. Now, this is the ultimate reality, Noah, where blindness and hardness of heart can lead you. It can lead you to a place where you try to kill off everything that is of God. That means you don't want anything to do with those things. Why? Because it's a reflection of what we're not, what we're called to be. And so, do you remember what happened at the birth of Jesus?
Tons of baby boys there.
Exactly. We see another parallel. Moses was a great deliverer of his people, and so was Jesus. And so here's the enemy. Enemy comes in and tries to kill off God's promise. And then verse 20, it says, at this time, Moses was born and was well-pleasing to God, and he was brought up in his father's house for 3 months. Now, according to this, Noah, where was, I'm just going to drop this to you. Where was Moses born?
Egypt.
In Egypt. Do you remember when Herod tried to kill all the babies, do you remember where his parents took Jesus?
Egypt.
Exactly. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of parallelisms in here, which is awesome. And when I talk about these parallelisms, they're more than just something cool. Do you know what it means?
What?
It means that the Bible is one unified story from Genesis to Revelation. It's the most incredible thing that God has ever given us, besides salvation, of course, in the person of Jesus Christ. But because the Bible is 66 books written by 40 different authors over a time period of 1,500 years, it is one cohesive unit. That's what we mean, one unified story. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. And then verse 21, but when he was set out, Pharaoh's daughter took him away and brought him up as her own son. Beautiful statement there, but it's God's providence. Do you know what that means?
Oh, no.
It means that everything is in God provides everything that we need when we need it. And when they had to send baby Moses down that river, they put him in a little ark. that's a different story. My brain, the way it's wired, but Moses was in the same word that's used for Noah's Ark, God's safety, God's protection. God's hand was upon him as he floated down that river, and guess who picked him up? Pharaoh's daughter brought him up. See, this time it's different. Joseph was brought up from the pit into the palace, but here's Moses being brought up in a different way. God always, even though there's a lot of similarities, here's the thing. Even though there are similarities in the story, each one is unique, but the theme remains the same. God is in control. God is sovereign, and he does things differently at different times. There's a awesome Hebrews 1:1 tells us how God works, and he speaks in various ways at different times. Verse 22. Look at again. I want you to go ahead and read it, Noah.
And Moses was learned in all the wisdoms of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and deeds.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. So again, we take God's provision, how he provides, his providence, and he was able to educate Moses. There's a lot we could unpack there, but we're not going to. Verse 23, when he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. Now, to make a long story short, it's hard to know. Moses went through a process where he either discovered when he was young or maybe as a teenager what his real identity was. He was brought up for the first 40 years of his life as if he was Egyptian. He learned the language, the culture, the customs. Moses was highly skilled because that's what the Bible says, that he was mighty. He was mighty in words and deeds. That means just like Joseph, whatever Moses put his hands to, God made flourish, which is incredible. So all of the sudden, it said it came into his heart. In verse 13, what a beautiful thing. To do what? Visit his own people. In verse 24, and seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended, and what's that next word?
Avenged.
So here's the question, is Moses an avenger? It says he avenged, right? Moses is, seriously, I'm not trying to be funny about it, but it's kind of cool. Moses is an avenger. He defended and avenged who? Him who was oppressed and struck down the Egyptian. Now, I don't know if you remember this story, but do you remember what happened when he struck down the Egyptian?
He ran away.
He ran away because the guy died, right? Yeah.
And he was like scared.
But here's the thing. We can debate all day long. Should Moses have done that? Was it wrong? There's all that. To be honest with you, I don't care. Here's the point. Moses, at this moment, there is a revelation to us. You know what it reveals? He had the heart of God. Why? Because he avenged him who was oppressed. That's God's heart. That is God's heart. That is also why Jesus came. You and I, we have been oppressed. How? You're not a victim of your social circumstances, your economic circumstances. You're not oppressed through your racial. Somebody could look at you, and say, well, you're a white kid, even though you're half Brazilian, half American, right? You will never be oppressed. You could be, but not at this sense. Your greatest oppression is sin. That is the greatest oppression. And Jesus came to deliver us, to liberate us from that sin. Jesus, we could say it like this, is our ultimate avenger. Really. And then verse 25. Notice how quickly he goes. He says, for he supposed that his brethren would have understood that God would deliver them by his hand, but they did not understand. So think about this. Man, this is a good thing. I just defended, and you don't get it. This is the life of Jesus. They didn't get it. He came, he lived, he died, he rose again. He wept over his own brethren. You know, when we celebrate Palm Sunday, Jesus had come and he wept over the people. And he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I would have gathered you. But you know what? Just like them, they did not understand. They went from praising Jesus to saying, give us Barabbas. Same thing. Stephen is like, this is incredible what he's doing here. Verse 26, and the next day he appeared to two of them as they were fighting, and he tried to reconcile them. I got to pause there for a second. Didn't Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers?
Mm-hmm.
This is what Moses is exemplifying this. This is what Stephen's bringing up. This is God's will. Two people are fighting. Let's reconcile. Let's make peace. And he's saying, men and brethren, why do you wrong one another? Verse 27, but he who did his neighbor wrong pushed him away, saying, who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Do you know this is what they said? This is their posture, their heart towards Jesus. Who do you think you are? By what authority do you do these things? Right?
Yeah.
Everybody would go and say, here's my authority. Here's my credentials. You want to see my ID? I studied under Rabbi so-and-so, Rabbi this. That's my authority in the name of this rabbi. Jesus came in his own authority. He says, you've heard it said. He says, but I say to you, the authority that he had came direct from God. This is beautiful. So they said, who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Verse 28, do you want to kill me as you did the Egyptian yesterday? What is this? This is, they're now attacking him with their words. That's what they're doing. They're attacking him. The word here is ad hominem. Now, Noah, I know you like debates. You're interested in those things. You know what this means? When somebody is losing an argument or when somebody's trying to do something, they go to, it's an old Latin word called ad hominem. And it means that you start attacking the person because you can't win the debate through intellect or logic or anything else. Here's Moses saying, guys, let's make peace. What do? Who made you a ruler? Who do you think you are? Oh, do you want to kill us? Just like that Egyptian yesterday, they're attacking him. Verse 29. Then at this saying, Moses fled and became a dweller in the land of Midian, where he had 2 sons. And when 40 years had passed, let's pause here. Do you notice what Stephen has done now in just a few short verses? He's summarized the first 40 years of Moses' life from birth to the time that he made this defense, and now he's jumped another 40 years. Because in verse 39, after 40 years had passed, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire. Do you remember how Jesus is going to come back?
With, like, fire?
Yeah. Yeah, he's going to come back, right? With like flaming fire and vengeance. That's a signal of God. So notice now how the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire. What was at Pentecost? What came over there? What appeared over their heads?
Fire.
Fire. Yeah. And it says, in a bush in the wilderness of Mount Sinai. You know me. No, I can talk all day about this. I love the book of Exodus. You know, we did, I'm just telling you, but I'm thinking back. I need to go back and look at my notes, but we were in Bible study, and we went through the book of Exodus probably a good solid 1.5 years, 2 years, some of the best. I loved
You
it.
guys were in Exodus for real?
Yes, yes. And and it was only excuse me, it was only a small handful of us. What I mean by that, like just a few. And I used to be so heartbroken every Wednesday because I'm like, nobody wants this. Is stuff is so good. Like it was beautiful. I love Exodus.
So I can't picture doing like one book for like a year or two.
Well, we were doing it a little differently. You know how we're doing now a chapter a week?
Mm-hmm.
Back then, we did whatever on Sunday mornings. It wasn't like we were following, a
Yeah.
schedule. So we just said, hey, on Wednesdays, we're just going to go verse by verse in the book of Exodus. And we used, I would type out notes and do all that, but we had a good time. So that's why right now, I'm like, for me, this is precious what we're reading because I'm reflecting back on Exodus. And then, of course, we went through Exodus when we did the Torah as well. So let's go on. So the angel of the Lord in verse 30 appears to him in a flame of fire in a bush in the wilderness in Mount Sinai. Now, I want you to know, Noah, that for a Jewish person listening to this is one of the, besides God giving the law at Mount Sinai, the 10 Commandments and the rest of the law, this is one of the big events of their history because it was in this moment that God revealed his name, his character to Moses, the name, right? And then verse 31, when Moses saw it, he marveled at the sight. And as he drew near to observe, the voice, notice this now, the voice of the Lord came to him. Oh, that's beautiful. I'm tempted, but I won't. The voice, I just want to highlight that. The voice of the Lord came to him, saying, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Notice the next phrase. And Moses trembled and dared not to look. Why do you think that was, Noah?
I mean, like, because he knew it was God, and then he was just, I don't know how I would feel if like all of a sudden all that's happening.
Yeah. It's a holy, holy moment. And the closer you get to God, the more reverence of things that are holy. This was a holy moment. Moses trembled and dared not to look. Sometimes people will say, well, that's not the God I serve. Well, here's my thing. Even when you get into the New Testament, this is entirely consistent all throughout. John, I mean, when he had the revelation, he fell down as though he was dead. You know, the Apostle Paul, your proximity, how close you are to God, shows just how unholy you are, but yet we have our hope because Jesus makes us holy. Here's verse 33. Then the Lord said to him, take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. I have surely seen the oppression. Now, let me read it and I'll point this out. I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their groaning and have come down to deliver them. And now come, I will send you to Egypt. What was Moses doing when he avenged the person? He was avenging the oppressed. See, because he took on the heart of God, even though he struck that guy down and killed him. Remember, I said we could debate about that. This was the heart of God. And this was actually the reason that God said I could use him, because he had a heart for the oppressed. And now God is saying, he's affirming, okay, he says, take your sandals off. That's a different discussion as to why. But he says, notice what he says, I have surely seen, which tells us, Noah, that God sees. God sees. It's not every day and it's not every week that you're going to feel these, overwhelming sense of God. There will be times in your life when you won't. But this verse and the verse in Exodus is God's assurance that he has seen. He knows, he sees. And for 400 years, I'm using nice round numbers here, they had been oppressed. I'm sure they said, "Where's God?" They would cry out to God. God saying, I've heard, I've seen in his time. He says, I've heard their groaning. And now what has he done? He says, notice this, I heard their groaning and have come down to do what?
Deliver them.
Guess what? It is God who's going to deliver them, but he's going to use Moses, his servant. And in the New Testament, God came down again, and he was made flesh through, again, his servant, Jesus. Isaiah calls Jesus the suffering servant. That's the way that Jesus, the Messiah, is depicted. And then he says, I will send you to Egypt. Now, I want you to think about this. Do you remember what Jesus did with the disciples?
He sent them out.
Exactly. This is an idea of what we would call as a representative of God. I am sending you out to do the exact same thing that I've done, to preach, to declare that there is good news, to set the captives free, to deliver the oppressed, to, in essence, help the little guy. And I want to bring this into a big picture here. Remember when we talked about the lame man in Acts?
Uh-huh.
Where was he positioned?
At the, outside, the front of the temple.
Mm-hmm. He's from the outside looking in. The depiction there is, that's an idea, like a picture of the oppressed. It's like helping the little guy. Okay, you're a big, strong guy. You play football. You got a little guy. Are you going to just sit there and pounce on him? No. Right? Or if you see somebody getting picked on, guess what? You help the underdog. You help the little guy. You don't contribute to the oppression. And what has happened here is the system in Israel during this time was designed to do just that, oppress and weigh down through well, I shouldn't say crazy. They were man-made rules. I talked a little bit about this. I think it was with Miguel after the Bible study. The average person in Israel had been weighed down with the weight of the law because you had to follow the law to the exact letter. Like, oh, you couldn't move an inch on the Sabbath. You couldn't do this. You couldn't do that. But you know what the higher ups would do?
What?
They would turn a blind eye to people that had status, to people that had money. And they would be like, this little guy, nope, you can't cross the street on the Sabbath. But guess what? Your buddy over there that's a billionaire, maybe he attends the synagogue of the freedmen. Guess what? Wink, wink, nod, nod. Yeah, we're not going to say anything to you.
Would they do the same thing between them then?
They would. They would give an appearance as if they were strict observers of the law. Some of them very well could have been, okay? But this idea of oppression is not that. It's more. It is having what Jesus also called a scale that was rigged. So let's say you were to go sell something at the market, and you were a fisherman, and they say, I'm going to pay you $5 a pound of fish. That's a lot of money, actually. Not a good example, but just go with it. $5 a pound. And you get there and you're like, man, I've got this big old basket of fish. It's probably 50 pounds. And you go there and you put it on the scale and it's like, dang, that's only 30 pounds? What would happen? They would rig the scale to where it wouldn't read as high. Do you see? They would use a counterbalance. Mm-hmm. So God says the scales of justice must be equal, which means it's the same for the man who's rich or the man who is poor. You are to have equitable treatment, equity, based on judicial justice when it comes to to those things. You cannot turn a blind eye or show partiality. So part of what is going on here is this system was designed the exact opposite. And so Stephen is actually, in so many brilliant ways, bringing all of this out. So let's go back now and read it. God says, I've seen the oppression of my people. That was back then, and it's certainly happening at that moment with Stephen. He says, I've heard their groaning, yes, and I've come down to do what? To deliver them. And now come, I will send you to Egypt. Verse 35, this Moses, whom they rejected, saying, who made you a ruler and a judge, is the one God sent to be ruler and deliverer by the hand of the angel who appeared to him in the bush. So this is Stephen now. Stephen is now inserting his, what we would call homily, his homiletic, his preaching. He's saying, time out, just like I do most of these verses. Here's the point. I just told you about Moses, but guess what? They rejected him. They persecuted him. They attacked him. And this guy was the one that God used to deliver them. And what's going to be his point? You did the same to Jesus, right? And then he said in verse 36, he brought them out after he had shown wonders and signs in the land of Egypt and in the Red Sea and in the wilderness 40 years. Jesus went about preaching and teaching and performing miracles. That's all that Jesus did. His hands healed the sick, and yet they pierced him. His feet brought the good news, and they drove a stake through it. Verse 37.
Before you move on, I was gonna ask a question.
Sure.
Let me look for the verse 21.
Let's look at it. Verse 21. But when he was set out, Pharaoh's daughter took him away and brought him up as her own son.
Would that represent like Joseph raising Jesus as like his own, or no?
I'm not sure. I like the way you're thinking, though. I like the way your mind went with that. It could be, but what you would do is you would kind of make a mental note, and then you would say, I don't want to say absolutely yes or no, but I want to affirm I like the way you're thinking. It could. Pharaoh's daughter took him away and brought her up as her own son. Well, when you think, let's think through this for a moment. Was Mary Jesus' mother?
Yes.
She was. Was Pharaoh's daughter Moses' mother?
No.
No. So it might be hard to make that correlation in that sense, because Mary is Jesus' mom. She's the mother. We would say this, although sometimes Christians get a little uncomfortable, she's the mother of God. And I know you don't understand what that phrase means, but there's a whole historical context to that, but it's part of what we would call Orthodox Christian history. Anyway, my brain goes there because I was doing a course. I was refreshing on church history, and there was actually a council that affirmed Mary as we call her Theotokos, the Mother of God. All right, let's go on. Any other questions?
No.
Okay. Verse 37. It says, this is Stephen now. This is that Moses who said to the children of Israel, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brethren. Him shall you hear. Now, how can I get through this quickly? There's a famous passage where Moses spoke of a prophet who was to come. When I say a prophet, we're talking capital P in the greatest sense, like singular, a prophet. There were many prophets like Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Isaiah and all those guys, right? Which one's your favorite?
I don't have one.
I'm teasing. I was going to say, is it like Obadiah or Zephaniah or Zechariah? All these prophets, right? That isn't what Moses was talking about. He was talking that there would one day rise up a prophet. And that prophet, he was actually speaking of Jesus. And so what Stephen is doing, this is why they're going to kill him, is blasphemy. So let's read it again, verse 37. This is that Moses who said to the children of Israel, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me. Here's the key phrase, like me, like Moses. He'll be a deliverer. He'll go through the same trials. He'll go through the same rejections. And he says, him you shall hear. This, now verse 38, this is he who was in the congregation in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him on Mount Sinai, with our fathers, the one who received the living oracles to give us. Here's the totality of verse 38. Moses gave all of the law, the Torah, 613 commands. The 10 commandments are included in that.
How many do you know?
I know 2, 3, something like that, maybe. But he's showing what we would call in this moment the amount of revelation that was given is the equivalent. Okay, when a Jew thinks of something that's being revealed, they think of Moses. Like, that's crazy. Think of the teaching Jesus did now. Very similar. Did you know that even in the Gospels, like in the book of Matthew sets up Jesus as a greater Moses?
No.
Yeah, he does. You can go through and look at his life. Like you go from his birth. Okay, you know how we've overlaid, like Jesus was born, Herod tried to kill them, they fled to Egypt, he comes back, he goes and he gets baptized. It says it, and he's in the. Do you remember when Jesus was tempted?
Yeah.
How long was he tempted for?
40 days.
Exactly. And where did he go to be tempted?
A mountain.
Yeah, kind of. He was out in the wilderness, right? For how many days again?
40.
How long? Do you remember what it said in here? How long he was in the wilderness according to verse 36?
40 years.
40 years, right? There's the parallels between Jesus and Moses are awesome. So Matthew crafts his gospel in a beautiful way to set that up. And just as Moses went up, Noah, on to Mount Sinai to do what this verse just said in verse 38, to give him the oracles. Do you know where Jesus went and gave his oracles?
No.
It was on a mountain, but it wasn't Mount Sinai. It was called the Mount of
Olives?
Beatitudes. Yeah, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And it's also amazing because there's so many. We could talk all day about this, but there was even a time. Do you remember when Jesus borrowed a little boy's lunch and he fed how many?
5,000.
Yeah. And after that, there's an interesting fact because the people divided themselves into ranks, 50s and 100s, just like they did in the wilderness. And then they said, we're going to make him our deliverer. All right, let's keep going, or we won't finish. Okay, so he said, the end of verse 38, he's the one who received the living oracles to give us, whom our fathers would not obey but rejected. And in their hearts they turned back to Egypt, saying to Aaron, make us gods to go before us. And for this Moses who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him. And they made a calf in those days, offered sacrifices to the idol, and rejoiced in the works, notice this now, in the works of their own hands. Then God turned and gave them up to worship the host of heaven, as it is written in the book of the prophets. Did you not offer me slaughtered animals? Or did you offer me slaughtered animals and sacrifices during the 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? You also took up the tabernacle of Moloch and the star of your god Rephaim, images which you made to worship, and I will carry you away beyond Babylon. Here's the point. We're going to get into it in the next episode because I think we probably should finish up. Are you good with that?
Yeah.
Okay, here's the point. The Sanhedrin that he's speaking to, they've done the exact same thing that they've done in the wilderness. They have created an idol out of something that God has given them and blessed them with. Now, let me explain. God gave them all that gold out of Egypt. God even said, you're going to leave Egypt and you're going to leave better than you came out. He blessed them. They took all the gold from Egypt. So it was something God gave them, God ordained, God blessed them with. And what did they do? Converted it into an idol. The Sanhedrin are doing the same thing with the temple of God. They have turned it. God ordained it. God blessed them. God told them. It's not that the temple is evil, but it became evil because God's presence wasn't there. He was there as Jesus walked through, but God was not in that place. Why? Because ultimately it would point to us being the temple. And so they have, I want you to notice the phrase here in verse 41. It says, and they rejoiced in what?
The works of their own hands.
Exactly. That's what they were doing. They're rejoicing not in God, but in what they were doing. This is why the Bible says that we're saved by grace through faith, not of ourselves, lest anyone should boast. Now think about this. They were boasting in the works of their hands in the wilderness. So too were the Sanhedrin. And as a result, they worshiped the creation rather than the creator. And we cannot do that. Any thoughts? Any questions?
I had a one like it talking about like Joseph and Abraham and Moses and like all of them being like a type of. It reminded me of a song you made. It was like Matt Papa and Matt Boswell or something.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. We won't be able to play it on
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
I don't want to
yeah.
get well, I don't know if I do on Spotify, but I think I know. What's it called? It's called.
I haven't listened so that's why I would have to.
That's a good song. I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah.
Pull up the lyrics. I want to hear the.
I'm trying. I need to. I don't know like the name of the song. That's why.
Okay, let me think. It's.
Like, I only know one. It's like God of Abraham, and then it's like other. You know what I'm talking about though.
Son of God, Son of Man.
And then it goes into like Joshua and all that. I think also.
Yeah. No, that's a really good song. In fact, I can probably pull it up now.
I think we have it in our library. I just don't know like.
Well, yeah, our music library is really dirty. What I mean by that, it's unorganized.
Yes.
Let's see. It's going to bug me if we don't find it. Well, I won't be able to find it, but that's okay. We can put it in the comments or post it on Mighty. What is it called, Noah?
I'm just okay.
I'm Googling for those of you that are still with us and still listening. I think it's called God of.
Hey, wait.
No.
I'm gonna see.
That's all right.
If we find out, I'll post it on Mighty.
This is why I said it at Bible study. When you want to find something, you never can find it when you're in the moment. Later, we will.
And I've seen it I've seen it on a playlist at church before.
Yeah, no, that's a super good song. I'm actually glad you brought that up.
If I find it, I'll post it on Mighty.
Cool. Do you have any other thoughts or questions?
No.
All right, give me your thoughts now. I know that you've been kind of, I call it sludging or drudging through this chapter, but is it starting to make much more sense for you?
It's cool seeing connections from like the Old Testament to New Testament, and like him being able to defend his case even though it doesn't go through their heads.
Yeah. And most of the time when we look at it from our perspective, we're looking at even though Stephen is doing what we would call an apologetic, right? He's defending the faith even though he's being on offense. The outcome of it is not the important thing. Do you understand what I'm saying?
A little bit.
He lost his life, but what happened as a result?
Jesus died?
No, it's Stephen in this moment.
Oh.
Well, both Stephen and Jesus, but even though Stephen is similar to Jesus, he's not Jesus. But what I'm saying is Stephen is defending his faith and he's giving these connections. He's won the argument, but he gave his life for it. And on this side of heaven, on this earth, he didn't see the results. We would say he wasn't successful. However, he was very, very successful.
Yeah.
Do you remember what I said about the Apostle Paul, what Stephen did?
Apostle Paul.
We talked about it. The apostles, Saul was there, and it was because, this was Bible study last night. And by the way, I'm trying my best not to, I don't think I've been repetitive in any ways because we had a great Bible study and that's totally separate than what we're doing here on this podcast. But remember, Stephen said, Father, forgive them. And who was standing right there?
Saul.
Yeah. And he paved the way for that salvation. And guess what the Apostle Paul did? He wrote the majority of our New Testament, right?
Yeah.
So pretty cool. Pretty cool. Any other closing thoughts?
No.
All right. So do we get to go eat tacos now?
You know what both of us want.
Oh boy, I want tacos. That's what I want, man.
No.
All right. Well, no, I appreciate you being on. And those of you that are listening at home, thank you. We are going to, if Noah's on board, we're going to try to finish this out from 44 down to 60 in the next episode. And we'll do our best to do that. So thank you for sticking around. God bless you. Thank you for listening to Al Pastor with Brian Overturf. If you found value in this, please subscribe and get updates. Most places podcasts are available. We're right here on Anchor FM through Spotify, also on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and iHeartRadio. I hope you'll tune in for the next episode. Until then, we'll see you later.